As anyone who's perused the internet knows, arguably the most bizarre mating practices of all can be found among humans, with Rule 34 being a rather immutable law of nature. But it turns out other animal mating practices can be just as interesting, so today we're going to be looking at the wild and wacky world of animal mating, from the bizarre to the humorous to the downright disgusting. So for example, if you've ever wondered how porcupines mate given their quill-covered bodies, want to know which animal literally helicopters their poop and pee at their mate to attract them, besides my college girlfriend that is, how Finding Nemo would have been very different if actually accurate to the species, the intricacies of Lobster Lovin, the fascinating and rather humorous world of giraffe mating, the momentous mating that led to the darkly humorous Dead Duck Day, and much, much more, well, stick around because this one just might give you and your partner some ideas. And speaking of all that, animals are wild. Sometimes they're goofy, sometimes they're brilliant, and sometimes they're just plain weird. That's what makes watching them so fascinating. But while we're all amused by their antics, a lot of these same animals are struggling in the real world, and that's where my friends at Planet Wild come in. Planet Wild is a global community that takes real, tangible action for the planet. Think of it as crowdfunding for nature. Every month, their community funds a different project to tackle urgent missions, protecting endangered species, restoring ecosystems, cleaning up oceans, and the best part, you see exactly where your support goes, because each month they release a full video report right here on YouTube showing the project their members just helped fund. It's transparent, it's visual, and it's incredibly motivating. Take their recent mission in the Baltic Sea. They rescued orphan sea pups, raised them safely, and released them back into the wild, helping rebuild a population that's under major threat from climate change. I'm personally a member of Planet Wild because they're about restoring ecosystems and protecting these weird, wacky, and wonderful creatures that share our world with us. If this is something you care about too, please consider becoming a member as well. As everyone knows, the best time to protect habitats was years ago. The second best time is right now. And the first 100 of you who join get your first month of membership completely free, paid for by me. Just scan the QR code on the screen, check my link in the description, or use my code TODAY9 to sign up. You'll immediately have an impact in nature and see the results in less than 30 days here on YouTube. Membership is pay what you want, and you can cancel anytime. And if you want to see more directly one of their most recent projects, do go watch the Baby Seal report linked below. It'll make you smile, and it'll remind you why this matters. Now let's get back to the weird and wacky world of animal mating. And we begin with how porcupines mate given, all the sharp quills all over that aren't exactly conducive to vigorous lovemaking without looking like a pincushion after. For starters, female porcupines are receptive to sexual advances for only about 8 to 12 hours per year, also funny enough similar to my college girlfriend, with me at least. This mating typically occurs in the late summer or early fall. They do, however, take full advantage of that time. Females will mate several times with the male of their choice until he becomes sexually exhausted. And it does have to be a male of her choice. Unlike many female animals that are frequently copulated with without consent, such as with ducks with their bizarre mating rituals coming up next, it's not really possible for this to happen to the female porcupine. All she has to do to deter a potential unwanted male is to swipe his mating-ready exposed sensitive region with her tail. Problem solved. Thus, male porcupines are completely at the mercy of the female's desire when it comes to reproduction. Male porcupines also tend to have a tough time of it just to get to mate, generally having to chase off other male porcupines to win the right to start the mating ritual in the first place. This process often results in them getting stuck with quills during the fighting. But speaking of quills, how do they actually do it without getting poked, in the not fun way, during the act? After fighting off any other prospective males, porcupines begin their ludicrous lovemaking with some nose rubbing. If after this initial test the female is still keen on the male will then stand on his hind legs and the female allows him to urinate all over her body. But who hasn't been there? What's different about porcupines is that this isn't done in a normal bladder expelling fashion, but rather the pee is ejaculated at high pressure. Should this golden shower not be up to the female's standards, she will shake off the urine and find herself another mate. However, should the rain from the main vein be an acceptable scent and downpour level, she will then expose her non-quilled underbelly and allow the male to copulate for 2 to 5 minutes. If all is successful, approximately 100 to 200 days later, depending on the species, a little baby porcupine is born. And if you're now wondering, yes, baby porcupines are born with quills, but they're soft at this stage and take about an hour to harden, similar to your grandpa. Porcupines out of the way, let's now move on to the even more bizarre world of duck mating and discuss the rather humorous story of Dead Duck Day, which I'm not sure if it makes the ducks look somehow even worse than you're likely to already think of them when you hear about their mating practices, or it's just a testament to the fact that humans will take any excuse they find to celebrate something. So to start, as you probably know, most male birds do not have penises. They typically copulate by briefly touching genital openings with a female, called the cloacal kiss. However, interestingly enough, most ducks do have a penis. As to why, the hypothesis is because they are aquatic birds, it's likely that most of the sperm would be washed away if they just relied on the age-old practice of butt pumping. Chief among ducks in terms of phallic prowess is the Argentine lake duck, who not only has a penis, but has a penis as long as the duck himself at upwards of 17 inches, very similar to the typical male YouTube educator. And if you're wondering, this gives it the record for the longest penis of any vertebrate relative to their body length. And if you're further wondering, the largest animal penis ever measured was a 2.4 meter or 8 feet flaccid member belonging to a blue whale. Male barnacles, in contrast, may be relatively small, but have the largest penis proportional to its body size in the animal kingdom. It can reach up to 50 times the length of the barnacle's body, so as to be able to reach out of their shell and transfer sperm to a female neighbor. But going back to ducks, this rather impressive size of ducks' members and the reason for it all brings us to the bizarre story of Dead Duck Day, which didn't involve a male-female pairing, but rather one male duck desperate to get it on with another male duck and the human celebration that has derived from this. It all began at approximately 5:55 p.m. on June the 5th, 1995, when a male mallard collided with the glass facade of a wing of the National History Museum in Rotterdam, Holland, resulting in its death. Within moments of the dead duck hitting the floor, the unfortunate bird was mounted by another, much more alive duck, who proceeded to have vigorous intercourse with it for about 75 minutes before being forced away from the dead mallard by a cock-blocking human. On that note, observing this bizarre scene was one Kees Moliker, at the time an educational assistant at the museum and eventually its director. Naturally, when he saw this duck-on-dead duck Lovin go down, he grabbed a camera to film it. But bizarrely, not for Rule 34, but for science. Now, as you might have guessed from this sequence of events, it turns out that male ducks are incredibly sexually aggressive creatures. This fact, in combination with female ducks tending to be extremely picky about who they're willing to mate with, results in a considerable amount of duck sex, about 1 in 3 instances, being non-consensual. Over time, this has resulted in the female duck's reproductive tracts developing random twists and turns with dead ends along the path, all in an attempt to not actually have the unwanted duck's sperm fertilize anything. And it works, with only about 10% of non-consensual duck mating acts resulting in fertilization. To try to counteract the female's defenses here, the male duck's penises have evolved into a relatively long, sometimes spiny, corkscrew-like shape to try to fertilize some eggs anyway, as well as with bristles to seemingly try to get any rival duck's sperm out. Going back to Dead Duck Day, Moliker would write in an aptly titled paper, the first case of homosexual necrophilia in the mallard, after the breakup of the pairs from mid-March onwards, when the drakes congregate in small flocks, more than a dozen may chase a single female in the air trying to force her down. But that's the males and the females, so what's with the male-male dead duck Lovin? Well, sometimes the male will try to do the same to another male, and Moliker hypothesizes that the two ducks were probably engaged in a similar chase when the male duck that was attempting to flee the other duck collided with a window and died. Before 1995, well, duck experts had observed male ducks doing the same thing to dead female ducks, and have also commonly observed male ducks going to town on living male ducks. Never before had anyone ever seen a duck having one gender Lovin with a deceased member of its own kind. Thus, Moliker knew this event would be of great interest to ornithologists and thoroughly documented the event for science. Going on in the story, he states the living duck forcibly picked into the back, the base of the bill, and mostly into the back of the head of the dead mallard for about 2 minutes, then mounted the corpse and started to copulate with great force, almost continually picking the side of the head. He dismounted only twice, stayed near the dead duck, and picked the neck and the side of the head before mounting again. The first break lasted 3 minutes, and the second break lasted less than a minute. Finally, after 75 minutes, Moliker stated, "I had seen enough." Disturbed by the cruel scene he filmed, he went to collect the dead duck. Even then, he states, "The necrophilic mallard only reluctantly left his mate when I had approached him to about 5 meters. He did not fly away, but simply walked off a few meters. Weakly uttering a series of 2-note reb-reb calls, I secured the dead duck and left the museum. The mallard was still present at the site, calling reb-reb and apparently looking for his victim, who by then was in the freezer." As previously stated, Moliker eventually collated his findings in his paper, the first case of homosexual necrophilia in the mallard, that understandably caused quite a stir amongst seasoned bird nerds. In addition to being endlessly cited by his peers, the paper saw Moliker invited to give a TED Talk about the event and how it changed his life, and even won him an Ig Nobel Prize, a tongue-in-cheek but nonetheless coveted scientific award handed out to select researchers for scientific achievements that first make people laugh and then make them think. Among other of our favorite researchers who won this award was the team from the University of New Mexico who went to strip clubs and recruited 18 ladies to record their work hours and earnings for science. The result? After a sample size of over 5,000 lap dances in 60 days, it turned out that strippers who had normal menstrual cycles earned almost twice as much per hour in tips when ovulating compared to when menstruating, with the other times in their cycle earning roughly in between the two figures. Just as interesting, strippers who were taking contraceptive pills did not show any such significant variance in their tips. In another fascinating Ig Nobel Prize winning study, researchers at Auburn University in Alabama and Wayne State University in Michigan discovered that people who regularly listen to country music are significantly more likely to commit suicide, which checks out. But going back to Dead Duck Day since 1995, in honor of the duck that so courageously gave its life to let the world know that its kind did not mind having forced gay sex with their own dead, Moliker holds an informal memorial service on the anniversary of the fateful moment the duck collided with the museum. Originally, at each so-called Dead Duck Day, the guest of honor was usually the original dead duck himself, which Moliker had stuffed and put on display in the museum. After displaying the duck to the crowd, Moliker then talks about the event briefly. Next up, he discusses various bizarre instances of animal behavior that took place in the previous year, reads a message from a prominent scientist related to the event, then finishes up by discussing ideas about how to reduce instances of birds colliding with windows. After all this, which generally takes about 15 minutes, the gathered crowd is invited to attend a meal at a nearby Chinese restaurant for a 6-course duck dinner. At its peak before COVID, Dead Duck Day was attracting around 100 people, meaning a lot more dead ducks are needed to feed the teeming masses. However, with COVID came a canceling of this celebration temporarily, and since it is not only resumed on some level, but universities and researchers across the globe have been invited to franchise the Dead Duck Day event to help spread the celebration to all parts of the globe. For those who want to pay their respects to the duck at other times of the year, in 2013, a small splatter-shaped memorial was also placed at the exact location the duck hit the building's facade, below which is a plaque detailing its fate and its later value as a scientific curiosity. Beyond all this, in 2014, an aptly titled opera, the homosexual necrophiliac duck opera, depicting the event was composed by one Daniel Gillingwater, with Moliker himself getting to perform the duck call in the premiere at Imperial College London. And while you might at this point be thinking, well, that's enough internet for today, well, we have just begun, my friends, but that is enough about duck penises that put all except nerdy YouTube educator hosts to shame in size. Let's instead discuss the weird world of exploding penises, as well as the animal where the female can appear to have one. We'll start with the latter in the hyena. Depending on if you notice her udders, the female spotted hyena looks either like a male or a hermaphrodite. Being neither, the female hyena, like other mammals, has a uterus, ovaries, udders, labia, and clitoris. Unfortunately, or not depending on your preferences, we don't judge, the hyena's clitoris is incredibly long and frequently becomes erect, giving her the appearance of an aroused male. On top of that, her labia are formed in such a way, with a fold and connective tissue, that they strongly resemble a scrotum. Nonetheless, those aren't the family jewels, they're just some rather beefy built lady bits. So let's now talk about the hyena's clitoris, often referred to as a pseudopenis because of its resemblance to the real thing. This is used for urinating, copulating, and giving birth. And yes, you heard that right. This means she pees through it. During mating, the male hyena also inserts his penis directly into it. And later, when it's time to give birth, the baby is delivered through the clit. And in order to accommodate intercourse and delivery, rather than being erect, the pseudopenis becomes flaccid, thin, and elastic, which, once again, similar to grandpa. So let's now move on from pseudopenises to the exploding variety. Enter the bee. With bees, it is the sole queen who in some varieties may obtain her throne by ruthlessly killing her rivals, who gets her choice of mates from among the male drones in the colony. Rare, dramatic, and violent, bee copulation, and the drone's life, ends when the male's genitalia explodes within the queen. Not seemingly bothered at her now dying partner, the queen simply moves on to the next in line and will continue to mate over a series of flights with up to a few dozen drones exploding inside her. The queen then stores their semen to be used to produce fertilized eggs over the rest of her life. Noteworthy, virgin queens are often treated by worker bees as a worker bee until she's mated with the drones. Once she's done this, it's much harder to transplant her to a new hive and have her survive the ordeal, as the existing worker bees may decide she's an invader trying to usurp their queen and will ball her to death. More on this rather interesting way of killing invaders in a bit. Also of note here, queen bees emit a distinct noise in the range of G sharp known as quacking and tooting. When the queens are still in their queen cells, they'll often quack, then once they're out, they'll periodically toot. They'll do this most commonly when more than one queen is present in the hive, so it's thought this is some sort of way to announce themselves to any challenger. And speaking of bee mating, you may now be wondering what happens to the colony after the queen bee dies. Well, let's now look at the fascinating case of the honeybee, which creates a new queen bee as follows. Step 1, bees construct up to 20 wax queen cells. Step 2, the current queen lays fertilized eggs in each queen cell, or in the case of the death of the queen, some existing eggs under 3 days old will be converted to queen cells by the method in the following step. Step 3, the young nurse bees feed the young queen larva with a special rich creamy food called royal jelly and extend the cell downwards until it's about 25 millimeters in length. Step 4, about 9 days after laying, the first queen cell is sealed with a layer of wax. Step 5, assuming a new queen is being made because of an overpopulation within the hive, a large swarm, called the prime swarm of bees, leaves the hive, led by the older bees. The old queen also gets starved, so she is thinner and able to fly with the swarm, and they go off scouting for a new place to create a colony. During their trip, the swarm will take frequent breaks to send out scouts to go search on their own. The scouts report back, and from this information, they choose the best spot to go next until they finally settle on an optimal location. Step 6, back in the hive, about a week later, the first of the new queens will leave her cell. The new queen will then either choose to locate and kill her sister potential queens by stinging them through the wax walls of their cells, or she'll take a small swarm and go start a new hive somewhere else, particularly if the hive is still somewhat crowded. If she leaves, then the next to emerge from her cell will make the same decision. Eventually, one will decide to stay. Step 7, the young queen flies around and orients herself to her new surroundings. Step 8, the queen will take several mating flights as previously described until she's satisfied with the amount of sperm she has. Step 9, a few days later, the mated queen will begin to lay fertilized eggs at a rate of about 2,000 per day. Fertilized eggs become female worker bees. Unfertilized eggs get fertilized by male drones and become new drones. At any given time in a healthy hive, there is one queen bee, up to 40,000 or so female worker bees, and a few hundred male drones. Step 10, this queen will stay with the colony for at least a year until a large enough swarm is available to go start a new colony somewhere else. Though the worker bees only live 40 or so days, and drone bees die in mating or are evicted from the hive in the autumn to conserve food as they do no actual work, the queen bee can live up to 5 years. And before we move on from honeybees, one of the more interesting bee facts we've come across over the years is how the bees keep their hives warm in the winter and how all of this relates to elements of their reproduction. Up until only a handful of years ago, it was generally thought that the honeybee hives were kept warm by pupae in the brood and that the bees would often congregate there to warm themselves up from the pupae. Recently, this was found not to be the case when a new honeybee job was discovered, that of the heater bee. Bees of almost all age can perform this function by either vibrating their abdomens, or they can also decouple their wings from their muscles, allowing them to vigorously use these muscles without actually moving their wings. This can heat their bodies up to about 111 degrees Fahrenheit or 44 degrees Celsius, which is about 16 degrees Fahrenheit or 9 degrees Celsius hotter than their normal. Another new discovery that went with this was why queen bees leave certain cells in the brood empty. It was previously thought that this was an undesirable quality of a queen, so queens that left fewer empty cells were sought out. In fact, though, these empty cells are essential to a healthy hive. Before the discovery of heater bees using infrared technology, it was thought that the bees that crawled in these empty cells were cleaning them out. What's actually happening is that the heater bee will crawl inside these cells to keep the surrounding cells at the proper temperature, able to warm a maximum of about 70 or so cells per heater bee. The heater bees can also directly regulate temperature in individual cells by standing over and pressing their thorax against the cell, something which scientists used to think was just the bees resting. But in reality, they are working their wing muscles extremely hard to heat up the cell with their heightened body temperature. And why they do this has to do with job distribution. Normally, honeybee jobs are primarily assigned, so to speak, based on their age. For instance, worker bees that are about 1 to 2 days old spend their time cleaning cells, starting with the one they were born in, as well as keeping the brood warm. From 3 to 5 days old, they feed older larvae. From 6 to 11 days old, they feed the youngest larvae. From 12 to 17 days old, they produce wax, build combs, carry food, and perform undertaker duties. From 8 to 21 days old, they get guard duty, protecting the hive entrance. From 22 days old until their death at around 40 to 45 days, they get to fly from the hive, collecting pollen, nectar, water, pollinating plants, and things of this nature. However, if the hive needs more bees that are naturally inclined towards housekeeping jobs or foraging, the heater bees can adjust the temperature of certain cells to accommodate this, raising the temperature of a cell to 95 degrees Fahrenheit or 35 degrees Celsius rather than the normal cell temperature of about 93 degrees Fahrenheit or 34 degrees Celsius will produce bees that are more inclined to prefer foraging jobs over housekeeping ones and vice versa. So they'll be more reluctant or more eager to change jobs than other bees their age, depending on their former cell temperature. This helps make sure the needs of the colony can always be met given the current state of the hive and environment. Besides performing the task of heating the brood cells, heater bees, as mentioned earlier, also help regulate the overall temperature of the hive. This is essential as honeybees are cold-blooded, and once their body temperature drops below about 95 degrees Fahrenheit or 35 degrees Celsius, they lose the ability to fly, which is why once the outside temperature drops below around 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius, you'll no longer see honeybees flying around as they're no longer capable of keeping their body temperature high enough for flight. If the temperature drops low enough, they lose the ability to move at all. So going back to keeping the hive warm, during winter, the bees all clump together towards the middle of the hive, surrounding the queen. At this time, they allow the temperature of the hive to drop to around 81 degrees Fahrenheit or 27 degrees Celsius on the inside of the cluster to conserve energy. Bees on the outer parts of the cluster, which will usually be around 48 degrees Fahrenheit or 9 degrees Celsius, then occasionally rotate with the bees on the more crowded inner parts so that all the bees can keep warm enough to survive. Once the queen starts laying again, the temperature of the inner part of the hive will be raised back up to around 93 degrees Fahrenheit or 34 degrees Celsius. In order to support the heater bees at their job, other bees are given the job of occasionally bringing food to them as the heater bees' energy starts to run low from their constant, vigorous use of their wing muscles or vibrating to generate heat. On top of that, certain species of honeybee will actually use this heating effect as a weapon against invading insects. For instance, when attacking wasps, such bees have been observed to surround the wasp in a ball and begin beating their wing muscles and vigorously vibrating. The combination of lack of oxygen for the wasp inside the ball and the drastically raised internal temperature will eventually kill the wasp. Honeybees will also use this heat balling technique to kill a queen when necessary, such as when an invading queen comes into the hive or if the current queen is no longer capable of performing her duties and a new queen needs to be installed. Another fascinating honeybee fact is that they are better at some forms of very complex math than you, and they seem to vaguely understand that the world is round. So what's going on here? It turns out scientists have figured out how to interpret a honeybee's dance, something the bee uses to communicate where to find food, a new home, and things of this nature. More specifically, unlike ants that can follow pheromone trails left on the surface they walk, honeybees need a more explicit way to communicate locations of significant food sources, and they do so through the power of dance. This dance consists of bees walking around in circles and figure eights, sometimes with a waggle, or in other cases there's also a version sometimes called the tremble dance with, funny enough, this latter seemingly induced not just to indicate there is a need to switch some bees from foraging to more bees receiving the nectar, but also if the bee just has consumed some ethanol during their foraging. But as for the round or waggle dance, this communicates both relatively precise direction and distance to the food source. The more energetically the bee does the dance also indicates the bee thinks it's a particularly large food source, and thus, when multiple bees are dancing, the other bees should pay more attention to them. Either way, the directions here are relative to the sun. And you may now see the issue already. These little dances can take a really long time, so the angle of the sun is going to have changed while they do the dance. Thus, while doing the dance, the bee actually calculates the change in angle based on where the sun is right now with respect to the hive. And fascinatingly, even if it's at night when they're doing the dance, they calibrate the angles to associate with where the sun is right now on the other side of the world. Likewise, when the bees are following the instructions and flying towards the food, they calibrate what they learned based on where the sun is right now versus when the instructions were given. As for distance, while they're going in circles, they wiggle their abdomens. The more wiggles, the greater the distance, although they also seem to adjust their wiggles based on if they think there might be danger at a given food source, such as if a dead bee is at the food source. And on top of that, they may release pheromones while they dance for presumably other communication purposes in it all. It's even been hypothesized that the bees are using electrical fields and the buildup in their bodies as they fly to communicate additional information, or perhaps help a given bee get listened to in the first place. On that note, other foraging bees may ignore the dancing bees and just use their own experience about good food source areas around their hive, or simply search about randomly. But a percentage will follow where the dancing bees are indicating. But enough of bees, let's now talk about clownfish and how the plot of Finding Nemo would have needed some rather large changes to be accurate to the species. Unlike as depicted in Finding Nemo, clownfish are sequential hermaphrodites that first develop into males. In fact, they live in regimented schools made up of all males and just one female, the lone female being the dominant and generally the largest fish in a given group. The second in command of the school is usually the largest and most aggressive male of the group. Due to his dominance of the other males, he'll tend to ensure they stay small via taking the best food opportunities for himself and the like. Besides the perk of more food, he's also the only one who gets to breed with the female. During breeding, the female will lay sometimes thousands of eggs, usually on a pre-cleaned rock or coral close to the anemone they live in. After the eggs are laid, the male will go along and fertilize them. From here, if a given egg is poor quality, whether damaged, i.e. Nemo, or it becomes infected by a fungus or the like, the male will typically eat the egg. Likewise, if the egg is infertile, or if the clownfish is an inexperienced breeder or stressed, he may also simply just eat the eggs. Otherwise, the male, and rarely the female, will guard the egg for about 6 to 10 days it takes to hatch, as well as regularly fan them, which increases the chances of the eggs successfully developing. After the eggs hatch, the parent's job is done and they have nothing to do with the baby fish, who ascend to the surface and feed on plankton until maturation. And the really fascinating part here is if the female dies, the dominant male will get first choice of food and begin to gain weight, ultimately becoming female. She will then choose a breeding partner among the available males, which is usually the largest and most aggressive male available. At the same time, everyone else moves one up on the pecking order. The two will then pair off and breed together until something happens to one or the other, at which point the cycle begins again. It's thought that this peculiar ability to change sex developed because, unlike many other types of fish, clownfish almost never stray very far away from their homes in sea anemones, which they form a symbiotic relationship with. Thus, if not for their ability to adapt to potentially limited mating partners in their local area, they may not get a chance to breed at all. And just before we leave our discussion of clownfish and Finding Nemo, we'd be remiss without pointing out that contrary to what you may have seen in that film, whales do not spray water out of their blowholes. If they had such water in there, that would mean they had breathed that water in, which is just as bad for whales as it would be for humans. Further, the whale's trachea doesn't connect to the esophagus of the whale, so when Dory and Marley went down the whale's throat, in real life, they'd have simply been eaten. Now you might at this point be thinking, but I've seen whales spraying water out of their blowholes, so what gives? Well, the air inside the whale is typically quite warm from the whale's body heat. When it's exhaled, it meets the much cooler temperature of the air outside and immediately condenses, making it look like a spout of water. This is also often mixed with mucus. It is a nose after all. The great thing for avid whale watchers is that every species of whale has a differently shaped blowhole. Some even have two, which results in different shaped spouts. Because of this, an experienced whale watcher can tell what species of whale is nearby just by seeing their spouts. For instance, a humpback whale spout looks like a column, orca spouts are somewhat more bushy, and gray whales' two blowholes are positioned in such a way that their exhalation results in something of a heart-shaped spout. As a rule, baleen whales, those whales who don't have teeth but rather have baleen plates to filter food out of the water, have two blowholes, while toothed whales have just one blowhole. Types of baleen whales include the humpback, blue, and gray whales, and this is, of course, another inaccuracy in Finding Nemo, as that was a humpback whale that they showed having only one blowhole. Meanwhile, toothed whales include sperm whales and beluga whales, among others. And on that note of sperm whales, the blowhole of these whales is actually located on its left side rather than right on top of its head. It's technically a left nostril, and while they don't have a right nostril, they do have a right nasal passage that is fully developed. It just lacks an opening. And speaking of only one opening and erectile tissues, as another interesting bonus fact, about 85% of humans breathe out of just one nostril at a time. Go ahead, check you, we'll wait.
Hi, you hungry? Looking for a tempting treat? Hold on till I absorb some heat. Some added tang might please you too. I'll slide into an oven-fresh bun, and I'm ready for your eating fun.
Why don't you try a juicy good hot dog? Mmm, delicious.
Even more interesting is that the pattern of switching from breathing out of one nostril to the other happens in a cyclical fashion, with about 4 hours or so between each switch typically, although this can vary from person to person and vary based on your body position or nasal congestion. How your nose accomplishes this switch is via erectile tissue in your nose, which is very similar to the erectile tissue in the penis or clitoris. Erectile tissue will swell up in one nostril, mostly blocking it, and at the same time, erectile tissue in the other nostril will shrink, opening it up for breathing. Even more interesting is that depending on which nostril you're predominantly breathing out of at any given moment, it seems to greatly affect your body and brain. But we'll save that for another video, as this one's supposed to be all about animals getting busy with one another. So speaking of switching holes, let's now discuss the giraffe and their love of same-gender lovin'. For starters on their mating practices, male giraffes take a mouthful of the female's urine to determine if she'd be a good mate. This is known as the phlegm sequence, where the male giraffe will approach the female and then rub against her backside until she pees. When and if she does, he'll taste it to tell whether she's in heat or not. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, how's that different from normal, everyday human mating practices? I mean, who doesn't do that on any given Sunday? Well, to answer, they don't usually get busy right away after a good pee tasting, and also the male will probably mate with a few males first before he gets around to having his way with the female. But on this one, if she is in heat based on the pee tasting test, the male will then proceed to stalk her, with the female sometimes continually walking or running away from him. During this time, he will attempt to keep other males away from the female as he pursues her, which is often the point of the female's rejection, trying to see if she can get a male with a longer neck. When fighting over a female, the giraffes will establish dominance via high or low intensity necking. The low intensity version of necking involves pressing their necks against one another until one gets tired and gives up. In high intensity necking, they'll swing their heads and necks at each other, trying to land blows on the other giraffe. This type of fighting can last as much as a half hour before one will concede the match. With either type of fighting, very rarely is serious damage done. Further, the one with the longer neck almost always wins, same as with humans. Somewhat bizarrely, at least from a Darwinian perspective, after a necking battle, the males will frequently caress one another with their necks, which is sometimes misinterpreted as fighting, and then have sex together. In fact, it's estimated that 75% to 94% of the time male giraffes have sex, it is with another male giraffe rather than the female they were after in the first place. And although much more rare, female giraffes also occasionally get it on with one gender loving, and about 1% of female giraffe sexual encounters occur between two females rather than a male-female pairing. Noteworthy, if the female is particularly interested in a certain male, she may flip the script and even pursue him, rubbing her neck against him to try to get him to rub her rump so she can pee in his mouth. In these cases, she will rarely play hard to get and will typically let him mount her fairly quickly after he's gotten a taste of her pee. However they got there, once the female stands still long enough to allow the male to mount, coitus is extremely brief, lasting only a few seconds at most, once again proving it's not the size of the neck, but how you use it. Moving on from attracting a mate with urine or your length, let's now talk about attracting a mate with feces and vomit, shall we? For starters, if you think hippos are adorable despite their reputation of being ferocious, you may not think so after learning about their mating habits. Because of stiff competition, male hippopotami have devised a disgusting but apparently effective way to attract their women's attention, flinging poop at them. Which, to be fair, I imagine would also get the attention of most human females if you tried it, just, mating probably wouldn't follow. Unless... No, No, you're right. Stupid. But going back to hippos, the male hippo will position himself in view of a potential female mate and then proceed to defecate and urinate simultaneously. While doing so, he spins his tail like a hippocopter propeller, flinging his special mix far and wide to mark his territory. After the spray of aromatherapy has caught the eye of the female, and sometimes they get sprayed themselves, the hippos get down to business. But if helicoptering feces and urine aren't your thing for some reason, enter the white-fronted parrot's unique mating ritual. After selecting a suitable partner, the two parrots will begin kissing one another, locking their beaks and playing with each other's tongues, making these birds one of the few animals to engage in kissing. As the kissing session drags on, the male will eventually spice things up by vomiting into the female's mouth. Mating will typically follow, which honestly is not entirely different than what humans do, just in a slightly different order. The male traditionally buying the female dinner first, then making out, then mating. And speaking of humans, let's move on to the closest extant relative to humans along with chimpanzees in the bonobo monkey. For the bonobo, they find reason for mating even in the most trivial occurrences, sometimes even just as a way to greet one another. Humans shake hands, the bonobo shampoos the Wookiee. They also do not bother restricting themselves to partners that are of mating age, opposite gender partners, or even non-family members. Everybody is fair game, excepting the only firm taboo seems to be that males will typically not mate with their mothers. Another interesting mother fact related to bonobos and mating is this frequent mating is often used as a way to resolve conflict, which otherwise would have been resolved through violence, making the bonobo a fairly peaceful species as long as the mother-son pairing is maintained. As to why this is important, the males establish their rank in the society based on their mother's position. Without this, such as in captivity where the mother and sons are often separated, the males sometimes will become violent as with many other species of monkey. Also interestingly, the female bonobo practice of mating with one another is thought to be done as a form of bonding and helps the females work together and dominate individual males, forming something of a matriarchal society, hence why the males are judged based on their mother's position in the group. Like the white-fronted parrots in humans, the bonobo monkey is also one of the few animals that engage in kissing during mating, including so-called French kissing. And speaking of frequent mating, let's now discuss the brown antechinus, who will literally mate to death. Specifically, this marsupial from Australia spends as many as 5 to 14 hours per mating session with multiple partners during the mating season, which lasts about 2 weeks. This carefree lovemaking has a price to the male though. This minuscule male marsupial manically mates so much over the course of the 2 week of mating season that they ultimately often die from immune system collapse, internal bleeding, stress, and other complications due to their raucous lovemaking. The sad part is that many don't even end up fathering any children, as the females mate with so many different males in a short span that there is a high amount of competition among the sperm for a very small number of eggs. One thing's for certain though, not the worst way to go out. And speaking of dying to mate, enter the black widow and the praying mantis, the latter of which actually usually leaves the male alive unless they are being watched. But for starters, as you might guess from what their moniker has come to describe in females of other species, the black widow will sometimes decide to kill and then eat their mating partners after the deed is done. They're able to kill their mates rather than the other way around, thanks to the fact that their venom is approximately 3 times stronger than their male counterparts, leaving the male at a great disadvantage in a fight with a female. This fact is also why males of this species aren't typically dangerous to humans, but females are, though not usually fatal with proper medical care. The praying mantis females also sometimes kill their mates via biting off the head of the male during mating, usually just before the male dismounts, which funny enough increases the amount of sperm delivered. As alluded to though, contrary to popular belief, the praying mantis will not commonly eat the male when in the wild, though some instances of this have been observed. Fascinatingly, in all this, in captivity, if closely watched, mantises being highly visual creatures, they'll tend to bite the heads off of the males and eat them regardless of any other factors. However, when not being directly observed, as far as they're aware at least, when filmed instead and otherwise left alone in captivity, as well as fed ample amounts of food, many types of female mantises seem to be inclined to let their lovers live, and the male will even exhibit courtship dances. Also interestingly, male mantises that are going to attempt to mate with females that are hungry, they seem to be able to sense this as they'll approach much more cautiously and will stay mounted on the female longer, as well as dismount with great caution and speed, including trying to wait for an opportune moment that would maximize the chances of getting away once they pull out. So that's debunking a mantis myth. Let's now look at lobster lovin'. To begin with, contrary to popular belief, lobsters do not mate for life. The origins of the myth that they do are not clear, but it was widely widely popularized on an episode of Friends where Phoebe says Ross is Rachel's lobster and goes on to say that it is a known fact that lobsters fall in love and will mate for life. The truth is that not only do lobsters not mate for life, but the male lobster pretty much gets it on with every female lobster that comes a-knockin'. With lobsters, the female seeks out the male who normally has no interest in mating, but rather is all about fighting. Occasionally, a line will even form outside the male's little lobster home, with each female waiting her turn for some action. Same, my lobster friends, same. Male lobsters otherwise pretty much spend their time daily coming out of their dens and boxing all the other male lobsters while the females watch. One male lobster will inevitably dominate the other male lobsters in the area, and this male lobster will then get the privilege of mating with many of the female lobsters in said area. Interestingly, lobsters seem to be able to keep track of where all the other lobsters in the area live, so all the female lobsters, when they are ready to mate, will go line up at the door of the dominant male in their region. There's only one problem though. The male lobster has no interest in mating. He'd rather go out and fight some more with the other males. The females, however, have their ways to convince him maybe he'd rather be a lover and not a fighter, at least for a short while. In this case, she does so by something of a theme of a practice you're probably picking up on, pissing on his face. Specifically, first, when a mature female lobster is ready to molt, the female lobster will approach the dominant male's den. She will then urinate, giving off a pheromone that wafts into the male's den. The male will then emerge with claws raised, ready to attack. The female will then continue to pee on him from nozzles under her eyes. And as happens to most of us, the female pee will make the male more docile and less interested in fighting temporarily. The female will then either turn away submissively or more likely respond by briefly fighting the male before letting him win. With her chosen partner's ego sufficiently stroked and his body sufficiently pissed on, the female will place her claws on the male lobster's head, caressing it. They will then go into his den, and from this point, the female lobster will take off her clothes via shedding her hard outer layer. The male lobster will then either choose to eat her or put on some Marvin Gaye and get to business. Generally, he'll do the latter. Occasionally, though, if he's not sufficiently under the influence of her lady pee, he will decide to do the thing male lobsters are best at, namely attacking one another. And given she's, at this point, completely defenseless without her shell, if he chooses to attack her, she makes for an easy snack before letting in the next lady in line. Gotta keep up your energy. Being the top male lobster is hard work. If he decides to go the Marvin Gaye route, he will gently turn her limp body over onto her back, being careful not to tear her very soft fleshy bits. Women hate that, usually. Finally, he'll very gently mate with her. After the deed is done, he'll let her stay in his den for a week or so. Also during this time, while she is without her shell and very vulnerable, he will protect her by doing what he does best, beating up all the other male lobsters in the area. Once her shell has grown back, he's no longer attracted to her because she's gained a ton of weight since they got together, and worst is no longer peeing on him, so he kicks her out. At this point, the next lady lobster in line will take her turn with him. So next time you're sitting down to a nice plate of freshly boiled lobster, you can feel a little less guilty about eating the lobster, as you didn't just rob some poor creature of its life mate. You did, however, just have a living creature boiled alive, so tasty, tasty murder. Speaking of the next lady in line, let's now rapid fire some interesting animal mating practices. Enter the male Arabian camel, who will indicate they are wanting to mate via blowing up a portion of their soft palate with air to the point that it protrudes up to a foot out of its mouth. Next, they use their spit to make a low gurgling sound that results in foaming at the mouth. And if all that doesn't sound attractive enough, they also mark their territory by rubbing their necks where they have glands that produce a foul brown goo anywhere they can, and even pee on their own tails, all in an effort to attract a lady. And not only does this somehow work, but a dominant male will collect a harem with anywhere from 10 to 20 females. But challenges are many. A fight will typically start with low noises, then proceed to various head movements, then biting at each other's legs, and finally chomping at the opponent's head with sharp teeth. This last often results in injuries to the soft, squishy dula, which can be still hanging outside of the mouth. In addition to cuts, ulcers, and bruises, bits of food can even become lodged in the hanging sac, and each malady can lead to bleeding, as well as inflammation and swelling, to the point of even inability to withdraw the dula back into the mouth, or a dula that is completely trapped within it, and the male no longer able to whip it out for the ladies to enjoy gazing upon. Moving on from there, we have flatworms. Like most aquatic invertebrates, flatworms are hermaphrodites. Thus, much like can sometimes happen with switch-hitting humans, they determine who's going to be the bottom with a good old-fashioned bout of penis fencing, duking it out with their junk, trying to stab each other until one succeeds and ejaculates its sperm into the other flatworm. The loser flatworm is then resigned to giving birth and taking on the female role. Next up, we have banana slugs. This species of slug is not only the second largest in the world, but is infamous for being a lot like YouTube educators, extremely well endowed. In fact, some banana slugs have penises almost as long as their entire body length, and to add to that, it comes out of its head. So for perspective here, an 8-inch banana slug may have an 8-inch penis too. Their Latin name even actually translates to giant penis. When it comes to mating, these hermaphrodite slugs don't quite slug it out like the flatworms to determine which one becomes the mother, but rather they both insert their penises into each other at the same time. However, it's important that the slug finds a mate of its own or comparable size, because if the penis doesn't quite fit the anatomy of its mate, it seems to get stuck and the slug is unable to pull out after copulation, which can last for hours. But no biggie, in such cases, the other slug gets really kinky and starts chomping on the stuck slug's member. What's even stranger is that it's not uncommon to sometimes see both parties of the mating ritual chewing on each other's penises at the same time, leaving them both penisless after. It's been speculated from this that the slugs don't just do this to get unstuck, but also as a way to force the other to remain in a female-only capacity. Whatever the reasons, one thing's for sure, these slugs do not have reservation about chewing penises. In fact, a researcher once even witnessed a slug that was unable to retract its own penis after mating chew its own penis right off. And speaking of not having a penis, enter the New Mexico whiptail lizards. These lizards are the epitome of life finding a way, as they are all females. To mate, they will generally perform a type of pseudo-copulation where two females will act out having sex as if one was the male. While not strictly required to reproduce, this simulated sex has been shown to increase the fertility of the particular lizards acting out the copulation, producing more eggs than those who don't. Also of interest is that the lizard acting out the female role on the bottom will produce bigger eggs than the one acting out the male role. Who gets to be on top or bottom is alternated from mating season to mating season, with those who acted out the male part one season switching to acting out the female part the next, and vice versa. Moving on from there, next we have the anglerfish. These mysterious deep-sea creatures have one of the strangest survival mating rituals known in science for both sexes. The males in some species of anglerfish are born with a great sense of smell, but a stunted or underdeveloped digestive system which slowly shuts down as it matures. Their only mission in life is thus to find a female quickly before they die. When the little male anglerfish successfully sniffs out such a potential mate, he bites her, releasing an enzyme that fuses them together permanently, and then he dwindles into nothing but a small parasitic sperm receptacle attached to her. When the female is ready to release her eggs, the lump provides the sperm she needs to fertilize it. And if you're now wondering, a single female can't have many of these males attached to her at the same time. And speaking of fish, let's now move on to seahorses. The reproductive process of a seahorse begins when a male and a female meet up and dance. More specifically, for several days prior to the actual act of mating, the two fish, and yes, they are fish, will meet to intertwine their tails and swim together. After this rather lengthy wooing, the male blows water through an egg pouch on his stomach. The water flow expands and opens the pouch to demonstrate to the female that it is empty and ready for her to insert her ovipositor, which is an organ used to lay eggs. At this point, the two swim in a sort of snout-to-snout embrace, spiraling upward romantically through the water, trying to line up so that the female can insert her ovipositor into the male's pouch. She does this several times, in the end depositing anywhere from a few dozen to thousands of eggs into the male's pouch, depending on the species of seahorse. When it's all done, the female does not stay to cuddle, but simply swims away and finds a nice place to rest while her ovipositor contracts, which can take a couple of hours. After his lady friend is gone, the male attaches himself to a nearby plant and releases sperm directly into the water around him to fertilize the eggs, which are now embedded in a wall of his pouch. The pouch in turn provides oxygen and prolactin to nurture the eggs. During the gestation period, anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, the female visits the male on a daily basis, though not for long. The two simply interacting for a few minutes each time, swimming together much like they did during courtship. As the male prepares to give birth, his pouch gets rounder and rounder and rounder, and in the minutes immediately preceding the magic hour, his muscles contort, bending him backwards and forward repeatedly for about 10 minutes until all the babies, known as fry, explode out of his pouch. The male's pouch then returns to its normal size and position in only about an hour, and he's ready to start the process again within just a few hours, and sometimes even does. On that note, after giving birth, the male then goes out for cigarettes and leaves the kids to fend for themselves. In the end, around 5 infant seahorses in every 1,000 survive to adulthood. Many are eaten by predators or die of starvation when ocean currents push them away from food sources. Even so, by fish standards, 5 out of 1,000 is actually a pretty good rate, thanks to the father's pouch protecting the little ones for a time, while other fish often lay eggs and immediately abandon them after fertilization. And okay, one more for the road. Speaking of a rather different sea life reproduction, let's talk about the parasite that becomes a usable tongue, as well as the stuff of nightmares. The tiny Samathau exegao, or tongue-eating louse, starts its life floating around in the water, then, if it's lucky, enters its victim through the gills. Once inside, the female latches onto the base of the fish's tongue, while the male attaches just behind her near the gills, very close at hand to make some tongue-replacing babies. Going back to the female, through her front claws, she sucks the fish's blood, which causes the tongue to die and drop off. She will then reattach, this time to the tongue stub, effectively becoming its replacement. From here, the fish can and will use the parasite as if it were its natural tongue, and seemingly, other than losing a tongue, the infected fish do not seem to suffer any from the infestation. And if you're wondering what happens if no female is present in the fish mouth, nature finds a way again, with an extra male hanging about near the gills, simply changing sex from male to female, crawling up to the tongue and doing its thing there until it's the tongue now. There's one bright spot in this nightmare fodder. It is that the creature does not eat human tongues, is not poisonous, and can at worst only hurt you a little bit if you handle it in your hands and it decides to bite you. So yep, that's today's video all about how weird the world of mating is from hippos to humans. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please do subscribe to this channel for more. And just before you go, don't forget to check out Planet Wild by scanning this QR code or clicking the link in the description. You'll immediately have an impact on nature and see the result in less than 30 days right here on YouTube. If you want to see them in action right now, check out their latest project, Rescuing Seals, also linked below. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a phenomenal day.